And if you want to go ahead and start, Douglas, that would be great.
All right. Good morning, everybody. And I suspect it's good evening for some people and good afternoon in other parts of the world. But thank you very much for joining us today for the third installation of the Cross-Cultural Sketching School. So far, it's proven to be a great success, and I think that this morning is going to be no exception. I just wanted to say, though, a word of thanks to everybody. I noticed there's a number of people on the call who helped us out last week when we were putting together this massive proposal for the Global Studio 2.0, as we call it. And I want to share with you that we managed to find over, well, actually close to $1.5 million in matching contributions, both cash and in kind. And so some of the people on the call here contributed, and thank you very much for your generosity. We were also able to put together a team of over 40 partners, collaborators, and co-directors from 12 different countries on 6 different continents. So we really have a great representation, and I think we have a very, very powerful proposal. So fingers are crossed that we make it to the next stage. And if we do, we may be bothering you again to see how others could be involved. So stay tuned and we'll see what happens next. We're really looking forward to getting to the next stage of the competition, but we won't hear until June. But events like this, we'll try and keep them going. And if you have ideas for events as we sort of transition the Global Studio, please let us know. In particular, if you want to volunteer to do something or do a lecture on something, we'd like to hear from you because we want to keep this going throughout the summer and the fall until hopefully in the spring of next year, we hear about the Global Studio 2.0. So again, thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kristen. And again, thank you to Kristen and to Henry and to Joanna and to David today for putting all this together. As I say, it's proving to be a great success and we're getting a lot of really positive feedback. So thank you. Over to you, Kristen.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kristen Kornienko. I'm the coordinator of the collaboration that's the Global Studio. And I want to echo Douglas's thank you to everyone who's helped us put this sketching school together and all of you who are joining us. And I'd like to encourage you to check out the mural board if you haven't, and because we've added some more resources to it. And also we're having more and more of people's sketches are being uploaded. So it's really fun to look around at everybody's drawings. Including we have some of the youth from Cliptown have uploaded their drawings as well. So there's quite a nice collection going there. I'll begin with a land acknowledgement. Right now I'm visiting Prince George, situated on the unceded ancestral lands of the Tletle Tene Nation, part of the territory of the Dakel or Carrier people. The name Kitle Tene means the people from the confluence of the river in the Carrier language, referring to where the Ni Icha Ko, meaning river of strong undercurrents, and Lata Ko, meaning big mouth river. With the arrival of the European settlers and colonialism, the Kitle Tene were renamed the Fort George Indians, and the river became the Nechako River and the Fraser River. A Spletching elder described to me how this action of renaming was an erasure of the thousands of years of relationship to the land and the oral histories reflecting cultural attachment to those places. To her, the address of this renaming must be part of reconciliation. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm a 5th generation white settler, now living and working as an uninvited guest on the lands of the Secwepemc Nation, and that I benefit from the intergenerational wealth of land ownership. I'm a squatter on those lands. That region, like the Dakel, was not negotiated by treaty. It was stolen for its resource value and remains to this day unceded. I also live and work in Igoli or Johannesburg, South Africa, on Veld, that is the traditional lands of the San and the Soto-Tuana peoples. I learned in the course of my research that significant gold deposits were discovered in both these locations within 4 years of each other in the mid-1850s, triggering colonial mechanisms of land appropriation, displacement of communities thousands of years old, cultural assimilation, and imperial resource extraction. Here on the lands of the Dakel, the continued violence of resource extraction is very visible on the landscape. I commit to collaborate with my skills as a designer, visual creative, and educator to achieve goals in social and land justice towards conciliation in the places that I live and work. I'd like to hold a space for just a moment to think about and honor the reality of what this land acknowledgement means and what it challenges us to act on. McGill University has held a sketching school since 1921. Last year, David Covo generously offered to share this practice with the Global Studio in partnership with our faculty member, Hentry Tsang. In weekly meetings since last summer, we've posed the question amongst ourselves and with collaborators, how could the sketching school be reimagined to address equity and justice in architectural representation, as has been raised by speakers over the last year in the Global Studio, in the larger global dialogues, and demanded by our students. Here in Canada between 2007 and 2015, we had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, a practice modeled after the South African Apartheid Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Here it addressed the legacy of colonialism and the Indian residential schools, the last of which closed in 1996. The TRC found the government of Canada and its colonial actions and policies guilty of cultural genocide against the diverse cultures of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples across Turtle Island, now called Canada. Canada's final TRC report calls on governments, educational institutions, civil society groups, and all Canadians to take action on the 94 calls to action which it identified. Our intent is that curriculum change is a first step towards addressing many of these calls to action, but specifically I'd like to point to 63.3, which states the need for building student capacity for intellectual understanding, empathy, and mutual respect. As I've shared over the last 2 weeks, I found myself asking, what does it really mean to decolonize? I looked into myself at my own privilege and shared the wisdom, and I've shared wisdoms that I've read of others with you. These you can find in the opening statement on the mural board. But today I'd like to read a passage from the introduction of Essie Edougian's new book and recent Massey lectures, Out of the Sun, on race and storytelling. She says, we speak so much about the universality of being human, about the similar things that connect us, but I don't want to lose sight of that. But in some ways, such talk camouflages the problem of difference, not difference itself, but our diminishment of it. It can be just as illuminating, I think, to look at the opposite. This year of lockdowns and sickness has starkly revealed the gulfs between our lives. Experiences divide us, uneven access to necessities and comforts, different childhoods, traumas, and faiths. If we wish to understand each other, we must first acknowledge the vastly unequal places from which each of us speak, the ways some have been denied voices when others have spoken so easily and are so easily heard. In some respects, history functions as language does. Our words have agreed upon meanings. This is how we understand each other. Language is a shared tool based on a shared idea of reality, and its points of reference must generally be the same for it to work. But language can be changed by revoking one's consent, by refusing, for example, to agree on the meaning of a word, or by disavowing it, or by changing it entirely until it becomes something else, something new. History also works on the principle of the established reality. And just as language can be changed for better or for worse by revoking one's consent, so can our collective stories. What happens when once a settler narrative become unsettled? What happens when they begin to shift the boundaries of what we have long believed? She asks us to meditate on identity and belonging, and on the consoling refuge that stories can be. I am not, she says, a historian, only a storyteller with an interest in overlooked narratives. And I've always been curious as to why we sideline some stories and mythologize others. What social and political instincts inform our remembering? How much are our omissions the result of apathy, of indifference? I want to know the living, breathing people who have remained beyond our sight, occupying the shadows. And this year's Massey lectures are, I put the link on the Miro board, and they're all about language and graphic storytelling. So I then asked myself, who are the stories of Canadian colonization and today? Who are the people in the shadows who have historically and continue to remain beyond our sight? As we heard from Hentry last week, this includes people immigrating and grappling with their sense of identity and belonging in their new country and in the one they left. In this series of workshops and feedback sessions over the next several weeks, sketching will be presented as a process that frames how we document knowledge and understand the world around us, and how this informs architectural design. As the weeks go by, the question, whose frame, seems to have such increasing potency, as does the need to shift the largely Western dominance of spatial ideas and understanding. Sechaba and Chris have shown us ways to see and draw a cross-cultural difference without reduction. Again, I'm reminded through their lectures of the need as a white settler to find cultural humility, to explore how my drawing changes when I treat a rock as a sentient being and a knowledge keeper, rather than simply an object to draw or something to sit on. How do I unlearn and find that humility, to move forward in a way that isn't simply a more palatable reframing of assimilation? As we've said before, these workshops remain a work in progress. We continue to grapple over these types of questions as we work to bring real change to curriculum and truth to historical narratives, so as to value racial and gender identities, cultures, and worldviews, and to shift paternalism and privilege. There are moments of discomfort and disconnect as we all learn and unlearn together over these weeks. But I can only speak for myself when I say how much I've learned from the drawings I've done over these last 2 weeks, using the techniques that have been shared with us, and how this has given me a different sense of grounding in the landscapes I've drawn, and in myself. Again, in the second half of the sketching school, each of the teaching workshops will bring 3 perspectives. David and Hentry will continue to be with us each week, alongside collaborations with Joanna Nash today and Chibuzo Chanehe next week, each of whom bring different approaches and life experiences to drawing and how drawing informs architecture. I'd like to remind everyone that for some, this is deeply rooted in their own personal and painful histories, as well as in our collective histories of cultural genocide, slavery, and the social constructs of white supremacy. As teachers, we speak of providing safe spaces for these conversations. But the recent works of Sykes and Gachako on safe learning spaces reminds us that caring is a fundamentally relational activity that happens in a web of reciprocal relationships. In other words, we need a solidarity amongst all of us that supports participants' openness and courage. Conversations around decolonization can be triggering, and I've put contacts to our student mental health team in the sketching on the Miro board. Please reach out if you feel that you need to. And finally, again, I'd just like to mention how excited we are to have the 20 youth from the Splatchin Chimaltsin Society, a teaching center on the traditional lands of the Splatchin band in the Secwepemc Nation here in BC, and the 7 youth in Kliptown, Soweto, South Africa, who are joining us. And you can see some of the drawings from Kliptown are now on our Miro board. I'd like to thank Aaron Leon, the director of the Splatchin Chimaltsin Society, and say Ngiabanga Gakulu to Tabang Nkwanyana, the director of 1955 Creative Collaboration in Kliptown. And again, thank you to Douglas for organizing art supplies for all of these youth. All of the teaching and feedback sessions will be recorded and made available, just as a reminder, on the Global Studio website. Additionally, we continue to update the Miro boards, and we hope that you will continue to take photos of your drawings and add them to the gallery. And as we talked about last week, if people don't feel comfortable including their name with their drawings, that's totally fine. So again, I'd just like to say thank you to everyone who has helped with the sketching school, and to those of you participating, and to say, please enjoy the drawing. And also, I hope you feel the power of its healing. Today, we're very fortunate to have Joanna Nash join us as a collaborator. Joanna is the child of a Slovakian secular Jewish parents who were World War II refugees in London, England. Her family emigrated to Canada 12 years later, and she grew up in Montreal. She identifies as whitish and having been educated in Western tradition. She supported herself as a teacher guide of drawing, painting, and design. Her politics are socialistic with aspirations toward humanitarianism. Joanna says that the people of note who influenced her are her father, 2 art teachers, and the sensei who trained her in kendo, liando, and Japanese calligraphy. 20 years ago, she left urban Montreal to live in Arundel, a rural farming community, to be closer to nature and to slow down. There she finds that nature and the surrounding farm animals remind her of her to value moments of awareness and accept the changeability of life. Joanna's teaching philosophy matches the ambitions of art, by which generations of diverse artists have sought to understand themselves, their unique experiences, and their environment. So thank you very much for joining us today, Joanna. And with that, I will hand things over to you.
Thank you. And hello, everybody. It's morning here in Arundel, and it's minus 15 degrees. That's cold. So if my lips turn blue, someone has to resuscitate me. I'm very grateful to be here. I've passed through Alberta a couple of times, but I've never been to South Africa. And I don't know if I'll have that chance in my life. So this is a wonderful opportunity to meet you, everybody. And Henry and Kristen and maybe David will be pulled in to be my co-pilots here, since I've had to learn a new technology over the last few weeks. and I don't want to crash the plane. So let's hope for the best. So my subjects, subject and object, were given to me, and I'm going to attempt in a modest way to give you my interpretation. I'm going to give you time to read the captions and come in with a little bit of commentary as needed. And if you have questions about particular images or whatever, save them for the end and we will get to them. So, when I talk about me being embedded in my images, what I'm referring to is tactile, my hands, how I touch my tools, my emotions propel themselves into the tools, and I leave a very personal mark on my work. That is being subjective, putting myself into my work. And the subjects vary. They come out of the life around me. The boots, for instance, were boots worn by friends of mine, and they became instilled with the personality of my friends, how they take them off in an orderly fashion, or how they're sort of left to right and left on the balcony. The wall of dogs on the left of the screen were me just painting quick sketches of my sleeping dog. The figure on the right, a model, Jean-Pierre, a good friend who also posed for the students at McGill. He is the subject of the sketch, as the landscape where I live in the middle is the subject. The boots are the subject, and we'll go on from there. Let's go to this slide here. In this slide, you see Jean-Pierre posing again outside, but let's look at what the photo is about. This is a question I like to ask when I look at photography or when I look at paintings or sketches. The first photo seems to be about 3 people, 2 dogs, trees, a big rock, something unclear on the left side. There's too much going on, and I can't really identify the subject. If I look at image 2, which I've cropped or cut, I see somebody looking at a man who appears to be posing in nature. One dog is looking on too. So we've narrowed down the subject a little bit. If I look at slide 3 and I arrange these, I eliminated one dog and I put the second figure in the foreground or front of the picture where the person is facing the man sitting on the rock. Whether we know that he's posing or not, she is looking at him or she's facing him. The subject seems to be more clear. She is looking at him. Now, she's also a subject, but maybe not quite as important as him. However, there's lots of rocks. And in reference to how I might want to sketch this, I'd move on to slide number 5, where I don't have rocks taking up an enormous amount of space in the previous slide. I see the figure looking at the model, and a story or narrative has been simplified. He's the subject, she's looking at him, and let's see what happens if we change the type of looking that's going on here. So on the left, it's a portrait with the face blown up. Obviously, to me, the subject is the model. In the middle slide, the same person, Jean-Pierre, And if I call him by his name, he's subjectified even more than being the subject of the sketch. If I call him the model, he becomes anybody and more objectified. So let's look at what's going on in the middle. The context becomes apparent. That's the space around the model. And the context adds important clues. Jean-Pierre is posing in a landscape with two figures observing him in the lower front, or what I would call as a painter, the foreground. His central position is important. It adds to him being the subject, also because of the lighting. He's in light, the models in the front are in dark. So his primacy as the subject is added to by the lighting. Let's look at the slide on the right side. In that slide, the model Jean-Pierre, well, we don't know it's him. It could be anybody. It's just a dark silhouette of a human shape, has moved down to the bottom of the page. And elements on the top, which are structural in some way, they're sort of semi-clear, they kind of share the importance with him. As he has become a human shape and is no longer Jean-Pierre to the viewer, and those other objects have come into view, I would say either we have a shared subject here, top and bottom, or both elements have become objectified. And that in itself is not bad, but it has created a different kind of an image. So let's move on. And let's talk a little bit about some of the issues that I thought would interest you, as well as the topic of subject and object. Some of you will be curious about how your work differentiates itself from that of others. So I've listed a few things that I thought make a work that's done by hand, well observed by one person, who puts their feeling and their own touch into the sketch. And I would say that that's what makes it original. So you read through that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can feel about a subject. There's a structure at the top of this sketch, and I know it's my chicken house. It's not obvious to everybody, but it's structured differently from the energy in the context around and in front of it. And because I know what it is, I work with a kind of a passion that I direct towards the things I like and I know. And it's really good, I think, to let yourself enter into the sketch and become part of it, because that's really all you can put into your drawing. You can put in the subject, you can put in the context, which would be more of objects around the subject, but you yourself have to be in there too. Let's move on here to what some of you are actually asked to do now, to go out and sketch in your own environment. In public, when I'm sketching, I stay as far away as I can from whom I'm sketching. I don't want to invade the physical or emotional space of my subject. That would make them nervous. So I sit as far away as I can and still see them. And if I'm sketching somebody in public and they move away, I don't go on to another sketch. I try and find another person in the environment, if there are a few people around, and I will kind of transform the first unfinished person in my sketch into the second one that's still there. So there's a certain flexibility that you need when you sketch outdoors. You can't control your subject. You can control objects, structures, people who aren't moving, perhaps trees, those things we don't worry about. But subjects will move around. Go with it. Try and be as flexible as you can when you sketch, because you can't control that everything is going to stay there. And so you either turn pages and start again, or you try and transform what you're looking at, perhaps, into something else as life changes around you. So working with your subject of choice, like the slides on the left, that's perhaps just visualizing what you see. When I sketch, I'm often trying to produce resource material that I can use into another idea. I can bring what I see in real life into an idea later on, but that is a long process of observation, more observation, sketching resource material, inventing, reaching into my memory. So all these things, they're like ingredients when you're making a meal. They're going to come together, and eventually, if I'm lucky, they may yield an idea that I can use. So I've had a lot of experience over the years sketching people. And when I travel, I take little sketchbooks with me. I might be looking at a subject that's a landscape, rocks, trees, ocean, whatever. That's my subject. But out of my imagination and my capacity from having memorized and looked at the shape of people for many years, I can insert people into landscapes if I want to. They're like imaginary companions that I can carry around with me. So on the right, I was traveling in the States in a beautiful landscape, somewhat desert-like, and I brought these little figures, which were in my head, and I inserted them into these big landscapes. And I realized it was very interesting for me to work with little figures in big space. And an idea began to formulate for me. So when I came home, I thought, okay, how can I design space made up of memories of my sketches and using my actual sketches? So I began a series of looking at a model in space and making him less important, but actually sharing my subject with some of the objects around me. So the figure, which has a lot of importance for us, is still the subject. But how I place the subject, where I place the subject, how I use the subject is as an element or object in the landscape. So what I was trying to do was come closer to this idea that was vague in my mind, but which felt important to me. And I tried to approach this problem from different angles. So I did a series of these sketches, moving the figure around, not putting the figure in the obvious place in the middle, but trying to create interesting relationships between the object and the nature. Whoops, I have to go backwards here. Let's see if I remember how. Oh, yes. Ooh, such power in the computer. Okay, so I'm still experimenting with a subject and objects sharing space, sharing a landscape. And I do many of these. When I'm in a good spirit for sketching, I do as much as I can, one after another. And I don't look at them critically. I'm not judging myself. I really don't care what anybody thinks about them. I'm sketching for me. It's my personal relationship to the world and to try and understand the world around me. So I do as many of them as I can, because there may be other times where I don't feel like working. I don't feel I'm connecting to what I'm looking at. And so it's important when you're really connected to your subject that you go full force, work with passion, work with feeling, and work with urgency. So we have these sketches of the subject. The human subject carries a lot of importance just by their configuration, even without details. But there's something else that we often ignore. We call it negative space. Let's call it the white space, the empty space. Only it isn't empty. It has an extreme importance when we sketch, especially in the design, in the feeling, the energy, the push and pull of the shapes. So the negative spaces are as important as the positive shapes or positive spaces. Just like sometimes the object can become the subject. We'll get into that a bit more. So when you sketch, look around your subjects. Try not to get totally focused on your subject, which could be whatever you decide is important. If you get mesmerized or really stuck on your subject and don't notice what's happening around it, you're going to miss a lot. So you're looking at your subject, you're sketching, you're looking at the top of your page, at the bottom, at the left, at the right. Keep circulating, come back to the subject if you have to. Keep energized. If you get bored, turn the page. Because if your sketch is boring, there isn't a viewer who's going to stay awake. They're not going to bother looking. So you have to be engaged. And the engagement, the interest, the connection with your subject might last a few seconds, a few minutes, probably not an hour, because you're a different person in an hour. You might be somebody feeling a certain way when you start to sketch. 20 minutes, half an hour later, 2 hours later, you're going to feel different. Your sketch is going to look different. So the other thing I noticed when I sketch and when I watch people sketching is that they watch their hands sometimes. They get self-conscious. Instead of looking at the subject, connecting to the subject, feeling whatever that connection is, even if it's only for a short while, don't watch yourself sketching. It doesn't matter really what your hand is doing. Your hand will stay in the sketch. The hand, when it connects lines and shapes to the edges of the sketch, may go out into space. Don't worry. It doesn't matter what you look like when you're sketching. So if your hand leaves the page, it's good because it connects some of the content, the subject or objects, to the edges. That creates visual energy. Your hand may go off like a dancer in space. Bring it back in. So connect your energy to the whole space available to you. Don't restrict it to a little amount of space in the middle. You're not restricted. You're free. Sketching is a very freeing activity, and it's your activity. You're in control of it. You decide what the subject is. You decide how to interpret the subject. You decide where the subject has to be. And with that freedom that we do get from sketching and painting, you also are responsible for it. But that responsibility simply means be true to it, accept it, like it or dislike it, but be connected to it. And if the connection breaks, put down your pencil. Take a look around your subject. Maybe there's something else you can pull into your sketch. Maybe there are decisions about things that mean they shouldn't be in there. We're going to get into that a little bit more. later on. So because I'm using my own artwork as stuff to demonstrate to you, I'm going to move on to what I would call how these little sketches evolve. So when I've gotten tired of working outdoors, which was primarily in black and white, and I get into the studio, then I begin to play. Once I'm inside and I'm not looking at what I was sketching, I'm free to imagine and alter and change and let that sketch take on another life. So I rip up old pieces of paper. I try not to waste my materials. And I begin to push the subject a little further ahead. So my figure is still a small figure in a big space. And the figure is still the primary subject. But because I shrunk the figure very small, what normally would be the objects, say the cliffs or mountains, have taken on more importance. They're becoming as important as my subject. The story is changing a little bit. In art, we call it the narrative, but we can call it a story. What is the person doing? Why are they there? What's happening? So on the left, I have two figures because the one way at the top, if I just had that single figure at the top, I might not feel an obligation to look down to the bottom of the design. And I ask myself, how can I get the viewer, whoever that is, to move around the space? So I put in a second figure, the one on the bottom. The minute there are two subjects, in this case, two human forms, we could say that a narrative or a conversation happens between them because one is way at the top and one is way at the bottom. The space between them is going to be traveled like a road. And we're not going to get stuck on the top, ignoring the rest, and we're not going to get stuck at the bottom. In the image on the right, we have one figure, and that figure seems to be looking down the landscape. I'm not sure what the figure's doing yet. I often don't know what I'm doing when I'm doing it, and I don't worry about that. If I were driving a truck on the highway, it would be a problem because it would be dangerous. I have to know what I'm doing. But when I'm sketching, it's open-ended. It's towards an end or a goal that isn't necessarily clear to me, but it will become clear. I think sketching and looking at what I've done is actually an education for me. I learn from what I'm doing rather than doing what I know. It's true that there's skills that are embedded in me that I know, but it's seeing how they're applied, which tells me a lot more. So I give my sketches a name. The reason I give them a name is because it helps me not get lost. So if I'm heading from Montreal to Johannesburg and I lose my map, I'm in trouble. But if I remember where I'm going, then I can remind myself and I can get there. It's the same in a sketch. I've seen people start sketching and halfway through they're lost. They're working automatically. Their hand is moving, they're looking, they're recording, but they seem to have lost contact with the subject. So give your sketch a name, call it anything, it's private for you. These little figures in big space, for me, led up to a series of paintings that I called Mittelmensch, which is basically an ordinary soul, but a small soul with big obstacles, which is the way I look at life. And I think it becomes for me a symbolic way of talking about something deeper than just going through my everyday life. It becomes a subject I want to pursue through my art. And it starts with looking, and it develops with sketching, and then it evolves by looking at those sketches and trying out different things and materials, and it leads me towards a painting. And that's partly my process and my reason for sketching. You might have similar reasons, you might have different reasons, but it's the connection with the subject and objects. And it's that in itself, there's a lot to talk about, because subject is what you designate as important. Object could be things around the subject that are also very important, but maybe of lesser importance. You designate, you prioritize what you're doing. And I will get back to subject and object because we're going to move on just a little bit more before we get to detail and information. And I actually thought of combining everything into one presentation, but I divided it into two. So this is the final, this is another painting based on observation of a small figure in big space, where the figure got a little bit bigger, but where the space is very, very important. The context is actually, for me, the real communication here. And it may look a little vague because I don't represent reality in a photographic way in my paintings. I'm capable of it. I'm capable of sketching very, very realistically if I have to. But because I'm a painter, I like the materiality, the colored mud. That's what I call paint. And I like that to become almost as important as the subject. The paint itself, for me, is a subject. The image, what I'm actually painting, sometimes is just there to lead me to paint. But anyhow, I'm not here to talk about that necessarily. But you keep in mind the images you've seen here, and we're going to move on. If there are questions that you have, let's address them at the end. And now I have to decide how I'm going to get to my second PowerPoint here. So are my co-pilots ready in case? Okay, let's try.
We are, Joanna. We're here.
Oh,
your pit crew is here.
You know, the pit crew is ready. You feel like a parachute for me. Okay, so here we are. This is, oh, now we have to, one sec, be patient, everybody. I'm a slow learner and we want full screen. So we're gonna go, we're gonna go to view. That sounds right. Is that right for full screen?
I think if you just hit play, if you go back to that main screen.
That's the easy way. Yes, true. Thank you. Why do I complicate these things, right? So here we go. All right. So here we are. We were looking at subject and object, which I'm not really sure I have clarified, but you've got Henry and David who are going to step in later on, and they are going to clarify it even more.
So, sorry, Joanna, sorry to interrupt. If you hit play in that top bar, then we'll get full screen, because right now we're not on full screen.
Oh, sorry, folks. Okay, one sec. I have to find this. You're seeing everything here, right? That you don't want to see.
That's it. Perfect. That's great.
Thank you.
We're
It's amazing what I can learn at my age. Okay, whoop. We don't want to go there. All right, here we are. So, painting is not about the subject, but how the subject is presented. I think that's also true in sketching. We'll discuss that afterwards. So let's go. I'm going to try and get my notes here on the second keynote. We'll have to see if I can do that. All right. Whoops. Well, maybe not. Oh yeah, here we go. Okay, I can't get my notes. I'll have to invent them as we go along, but I think that'll be okay. Just remind me, Henry, David, whoever, don't be shy. Remind me if I go off subject too much. So a sketch equals visual information. And when you're sketching, you're going to be looking at lots and lots of details. Some of those details are going to be vital to you. They're going to be very important. And others, we could say, can actually be ignored or be understated. So we'll just take a look here at these sketches. My style when I'm sketching will depend upon my mood. So it's not always consistent. Sometimes it varies, and I go with it. If I'm feeling happy and relaxed, it'll show in my sketch. If I get pissed off at something, it'll show in the sketch. The sketch is coming from me because it's subjective and it's personal, which is the way I like it. So based on what I mentioned before, we've got white spaces. Here we have two subjects. Maybe the bigger one is more important than the other. I don't know. Here we've thrown in a context, which describes the space a little bit. Where are these people? What are they doing? What is the sketch about? So we can look at it. We make up a story. Your story will be important to you. It's your interpretation of my sketch. It may or may not be what I want to talk about, but you're free to interpret it. I can't control that at all. So it's interesting sometimes that I might have an intention that is not communicated. People can get lost looking at my sketch and confused about what I'm talking about. So the information that's important has to be clear. If it's confusing, that's not good. So we want clarity. What is the sketch about? Is a very good question to ask yourself, because you may have to, whoops, one sec, I'm going to move on here. So I'm going to ask that question more often now, because I think you should do it when you're sketching. And in fact, I think it's an important question to ask. So on the left here, we ask ourselves, what's going on? What's this sketch about? Is it about the two human shapes on the bottom? Maybe, yeah, they're people. They should probably be what the sketch is about. The information is important. Then there's a lot of blank space. And then we have something, a big M in the corner. McDonald's, maybe, maybe not, maybe mama, I don't know. But the human eye, the viewer of this sketch, is going to connect those two corners. And the information is coming from the context, what's happening around the figures. It tells us something about them. Are they in a public place? Are they in a private space? How are they interacting? One might think, well, they're talking. Why are they talking? They're close, so they can hear what's going on. The information that comes out of a sketch like this, you can't really control how the viewer understands it, but you can guide them in the direction you want them to take. And that is important, to know what your control over a sketch actually is. So the primary information that you want to communicate, give it a name. That's why I make up a name, and it reminds me so I don't forget where I'm going. Sketching is fairly complex. You're observing a big scene in front of you, and you have to eliminate a lot of things to get closer to what you really want to say. We cannot say it all. A camera is more effective that way, but the sketcher can't say it all. So you need to be clear, and you have to remind yourself frequently, what is the prime focus of my sketch? And details that you put in or details that you put out are going to either strengthen the information or they're going to dilute it. So in the middle, I lived amongst sheeps here, and I often sketch them. One of the questions I would have to deal with when I sketch is how much context do I put in? How much detail do I put in? There might have been 35 fence posts. I'm in the middle now on the bottom. Do I need to draw every single fence post that I see in the field? No, I don't need to. I'm going to select 2 of those fence posts, make them important details, and that's enough. Because the viewer, if they recognize that they're posts or objects compared to the sheep, they'll figure out that there might be more or less, but they're not important. The sheep are important. So I put in 1 fence post in the front, and I put another one in the back. And that talks about fence posts surrounding the sheep, but it also talks about depth. Depth is space. What kind of space am I talking about in my sketch? With the sheep, it's not complicated. It's near and it's far. So there's the distance and the proximity, the front. The size and shape of the fence posts will talk about near and far. And that puts the space, the field that the sheep are in perspective. Let's go back to the 2 people near the big M sign. They are in what I would call a shallow space, an interior space. There isn't much depth. The design movement is going up and down from the left corner to the bottom right corner. That's the highway between the 2 important elements, subject and subject, one might say, or the subjects at the bottom and the object on the top. Call it as you define it, shallow space. So let's go now onto the right, and we'll look at a figure in a context. On the top and on the bottom, they were consecutive sketches. The figures feel like they are immersed in their context. What do I mean by that? They don't look pasted in. Very often in sketches, people are focusing on so many things, so much at the same time. Details, their main information that they want to communicate. How do you sharpen a pencil quickly before the person moves away? Should I use water and spread paint over it? We've got all these material or technical, important technical issues to deal with, plus the subject, plus the context, plus objects around the subject. What's important in the end is that you don't treat elements too differently in the sketch. If these people were thrown in at the end, I'm a different person when I begin my sketch, and 5, 10, 15 minutes later when I end it. They will look different. They're not going to blend into the scene because they're not treated with the same energy and the same touch. And that's very, very important. Keep yourself in the sketch and keep all those elements treated in a similar fashion. It doesn't mean you cannot make some things very important and others of less important. It doesn't mean you can't include some detail and eliminate or ignore other detail. What it means is your sketch should look like it was produced by one person in one emotional state and by one hand. You're looking for unity, you're looking for harmony. For me, it means work quickly, and it means work all over. So maybe I want to detail the figures a bit more, like the guy on the top, but I don't get stuck there. I force myself to look around the figure. I begin to develop some of the elements in the back, in the far away. I get back to the figure. So I'm moving to the left, to the right, on top and underneath. I'm in a constant movement when I sketch. That's what working with urgency means. It means don't fall asleep. So let's talk a little bit more. There's information and there's detail. And the big dilemma is how much detail do we include? Because our eyes are a little bit like a camera. We see everything, but we have to edit ourselves. We have to put in what's really important and leave out what isn't, so that we don't bore the viewer or overwhelm the viewer. So details that I include have to say something about my subject. They may also talk about secondary elements, whatever, but they need to be there because they say something. If a detail is passive, if it doesn't add to the sketch, eliminate it, get rid of it. It doesn't have to be there. In these images of birds, because I raised chickens, I had to include details that added to the form. It's very important that your primary forms are recognizable if that's what the information is about. So if I'm going to be drawing a chicken, it should look like a chicken, or at least a bird. So the details, which are contained within these big forms here, were important. There was a lot going on, other chickens, all kinds of stuff. That's not what I wanted to focus on. I wanted to focus upon the individual birds and the details that give the bird more essential birdness. I'm trying to use only those details that add something. The secondary, I won't even call them details, the context or imagery around the birds, in the case of the black and white sketches, they're giving energy. They're showing movement, which sadly, some of these are dead birds that the dead birds don't show anymore. But let's get back. When the details are contained inside a primary form, the important form, the subject, then they function. They have a reason to be there. They show volume or roundness. They can show flatness. They can describe important feathers. What is birdness? The feet, for sure. Dogs don't have feet like that. So the details that talk about claws and chicken feet, that's important to me. The beak, that's birdness. The wings. Anyhow, you will have to decide all that for yourselves. What to include, what not to include. The intention behind your sketch is also important, as it is for a painter. This is a sketch by Andrew Wyeth. It is a preparatory sketch, part of many resource materials that the painter will use towards an end product, a finished painting. So he also doesn't want to waste his time with things that aren't important or that don't communicate information. The resource sketch is about information. Here, about the dwelling. The subject is this dwelling, this structure. The objects are around it in the context. He's relying also on line and tonality. Tonality being the gray areas in between the white and the black. So it's like a scale, the gray scale. In painting, we call it values. High values are like high notes. Low values are like low notes. So the range between high and low is very important because it stimulates the eye. It's interesting. And where you want your viewer to look is often a place where the light value or the light contrast comes into contact with dark value or dark contrast, like that little opening at the bottom of the main structure or at what's happening on the roof. We'll get to that too. So let's look on the left here. I'm asking the question, is there too little detail? I'm not sure. I'm looking at this. So when I look at something, I have to ask my question, what is the sketch about? So this is a minimal sketch. It's using primarily tonality, which you will learn using a smudging technique with your pencils or with washes in watercolor. We see something at the top, sun or moon. We see at the bottom some context, though the context here, it's not as obvious, but it feels sky, water. It's kind of open to your interpretation. I kept it minimal because I don't want to say too much in my work. I don't want to bore the viewer. It's not my nature. Well, I am talking a lot here, but it's generally not my nature to say more than I have to. So let's look at the right-hand side here. This is totally energized. It has a lot of information. Now, because it's so detailed, I'm not entirely sure what is the primary information or subject in this sketch. There are things in the foreground, in the front. Are they the most important? They connect to stuff in the middle, which is sort of looking like some kind of a mechanical structure. Is that the most important? Is that the subject? And then there's the context or trees and landscape in the back. There's the dwelling or building on the right. There's a lot going on. For my taste, there's too much here. There's so many details that the primary information, which is perhaps we can call it the subject now, gets lost. If I look very clearly into the middle, I can see a human figure. Then I'm going to ask myself, well, what's this figure up to? What's this figure doing? The figure seems to be working. So maybe the primary information, the subject's in the middle. But my eye is zipping around at all these connected details, and phew, I'm exhausted. Too much to look at. Too much detail and information that is a little bit confusing because of that. So let's get back to some other images here. The hair on the right, got it wrong, on the left is highly detailed. If you enlarge that figure, it's minute, beautiful little details of fur and eyes and those gorgeous ears. But all those details are contained in the form, so they don't overwhelm. It's very, very much, this is a portrait of a big rabbit, a hare, and the details add to the richness without really distracting us. If this hare were in a context that was full of other details, we'd get lost. But those details are contained. They talk about the shape. They add richness. Let's call that texture. Sometimes details are essential because they add texture to what we're looking at. Rabbit fur, snow, bricks, wood, rocks, water, whatever. You have to decide amongst this huge array of things you're looking at. What is important? What is of secondary importance, etc. It's like a ladder. Aim for the top so that your subject is clear and that the information communicates, and then you use as much detail as you need. In the middle one here, we've got Nuala, who's the patient son of a friend of mine who loves to pose for a little bit of money, and he's a very interesting model. And I did a very quick washy sketch of him, maybe in about 10 minutes, because with a teenager, you cannot work for an hour and a half. Maybe if they're watching a soccer game, but normally you have to keep it short, which means I have to work fast. So when I sketch, I deal with reality. If my subject is likely to move or get bored, I have to speed up. The rabbit, I'm not sure how that was achieved. I don't think a camera was used. It may have come from a lot of observation. It may have come from a pet hare, but that amount of detail took a long time to develop. Nuala in the middle, 10 minutes. And he's developed, he is the subject, he is the prime information I'm communicating. I'm talking about him as an adolescent, as a human. His features, I want it to look like him. I want his posture to feel like an adolescent seated. And then I want a context around him made up of detail, but not realistic detail. It's made up of just energy. I guess I was just wiping my brush dry and moving it in directions to create a liveliness around the sketch. On the right-hand side, the photograph, I included this because I felt it was important in terms of the scale of detail. So we have a beautiful sunset. This is my view during a sunset in the evening. This is why I left the city. I needed this. This makes me feel good. And I took a photo of it. And when I took the photo, it was like a snapshot. It was primarily about the sky. The sky is the main subject. And the sky contains the details necessary to talk about a sunset, the colors, the shapes, etc. But when I looked at it for this presentation, I saw the shapes of the barns in the dark part. Now, do I include them? If I were doing a painting of this, would I make them stronger? How would I deal with it? So let's try a little experiment that painters use all the time. You take your finger, you put your finger horizontally over the barns, you make them disappear, and then you'll see that the whole lower part of this photograph is flat. It's just flat and dark. And the sky is so active and the base of the photo is so passive that if I were painting it, or if I were a better photographer or knew how to do Photoshop, I would probably ramp up the reflected color in the roofs of the barns just a little bit. So they become a reference for what's going on in the sky. And even if it's subtle, even if it's a very subtle detail in that dark space, it creates a relationship between the top and the bottom of the photograph. And it would create a relationship between the top and the bottom of a painting. Both things are very important. So the amount of secondary detail or details that you put in, they're not necessarily all of the same strength. But if there's enough connection between them or relationship between them, for instance, the color, then they don't jump out. They stay in their place. If the barn roofs were too strong in the reflected color of the sky, they would jump out too much. They would come too close. And every time I sketch, I'm aware of space. It's just something that comes with the sketch. The figure in the middle, Nuala, he's in a shallow space. It doesn't have a lot of near and far, but the sunset is about space. Nature is space. So it's important. It's an important thing to think about. How do you connect things in your sketches? Are you talking about near and far? So you have to think about a lot. Nobody promised you this would be easy. So here we are, where to put the details. It's not just which details to put in, it's where to put them and how to use them. So on the left, we have a sketch by Whistler, and it's the sketch of a sleeping or reclining woman. I can't even see if her eyes are open. I think she's sleeping. Now, I should be humble, but I'm going to say I don't like that sketch. It's not that I don't like the woman. It's not that I don't like the skill of the artist, but it feels cut off in the middle to me. Too much detail on the top, not enough detail on the bottom. And there isn't a transition between the energy and texture and the multitude of details on the top to connect to the bottom. There's some linear energy. That means lines that are going to behave like roads or pathways that lead us from the top of the figure to the bottom. But it still feels overworked on the top and underdone on the bottom. And I would say, because there isn't a pathway, a stronger transition between the top to the bottom. It may involve the number of lines, the thickness and thinness of lines. It might involve bringing some of that dark sketching further down, but somehow you want to connect them. You decide how you would change that. Anytime you see a sketch that you like or don't like, and this is done privately in your head, you don't have to tell the person who's done it. Ask yourself how you would do it. Would you improve on it? Can you improve on it? How would you improve on it? Because you will be asked at some point to talk about your sketches or to talk about someone else's sketches or about art. And it's good to practice. So I put the photograph of my beautiful feet on the right because I wanted to show you an example of transitional detail. I'm in a landscape with a near and a far, and it's very easy not to connect the two, and that would not really create a unified, harmonious sketch. So in the photograph, you've got my feet in the front, which are probably the subject. Then there's the context of where are the feet, and that's the landscape, which goes far into the distance. Now the rocks that are included, the bigger ones in the front, slowly meandering towards middle-sized rocks, towards smaller rocks, to rocks that eventually disappear in the distance. We cannot see detail as well in the distance as we do in the front. So the transition of the details, the big rocks to medium rocks to smaller rocks, helps connect the sketch from the foreground to the background. So Whistler might have learned something. I don't know, but I think the sketch on the left of the sleeping woman was developed the way it is because he began at the top when he had lots of time and he put in all the details he felt were necessary. And he either got tired, either the fire bell rang, or he lost interest in the bottom of the sketch. And none of those are excuses for not pulling a transition a little bit stronger down the drawing. You are responsible in the end for your sketch, whether it's finished, unfinished, whatever, you're responsible for it. And somehow we can all improve in our work. Here, let's go on to here. So we're still about information and detail. This time I've included two paintings. So the painting on the left is architectural. It was a Russian painter, and she called it A Gust of Wind. When I first saw that painting in a museum, I was totally absorbed in the architecture because that seemed to be what the painting was about. That seemed to be most of the information. But the gust of wind isn't really going to make those paintings move much. But then I started to examine the bottom where the figures are. Now the figures are not as obvious, probably because their tonality, meaning their level of contrast or grayness, blends them into the space. So even though they're detailed, their details aren't really as obvious to my eye. So the figures are important, and what they're doing has to do with the gust of wind. That's the story in the painter's mind and on their painting. But to me, the information is all about the buildings. So I'm assuming the context is highly important. There's a little bit of a fight here. It's kind of interesting to see the human figures pushed into a level of less importance, which is what I was trying to do with my own paintings of the small figure in big space. So here we have buildings that are speaking loudly and figures that are just whispering, but they are kind of sharing the subjectivity of that. Because they're human, they take up a lot of importance, and that tends to try and elevate them to the subject. But in fact, compared to the strength and the amount of detail done in the architecture, which is, I guess, the context for these subjects, they appear weaker. So go figure, I don't know. Let's look on the right. The right is San Francisco in the United States, which is a very hilly place, lots of hills and mountains. And this painting takes a real risk in design. And when we talk about risk or courage when you sketch or paint, we're referring to rule breaking. Okay, you want to be good, you obey the rules. You want to be bad, you try and break the rules. It's not always that simple, but we learn a lot. Teachers will tell us how to do stuff. But once again, painting isn't driving a truck on the highway. If my highway driving teacher says to me, you never do this, it could be dangerous, I'll probably listen. But as a painter, I have the privilege and the power to decide which rules apply. I can do anything. That's the freedom of art. It liberates you to describe the world as you see it in the way that you want to describe it. So back to our subject, which is detail and information. The information is about the city, specifically San Francisco. And that might involve detailing the buildings in a very recognizable way so that people who've been to San Francisco will know where they are. The details which are almost missing from the whole front triangular part, the foreground of this painting, they're minimal. But let's look and see what they are. They are primarily the three shadows from three lamp posts, three lights. And because of the angle and because of the way that they stretch towards the foreground, they activate what is actually an empty white space. So those three details, which are shadows, activate what could be a passive space. If they weren't there, the painting would be cut in half, and I'm not sure we would really start to examine the front space and see the shadow of a car and see the shadow of what is a structure, maybe another car, lower down. So even minimal details sometimes that most people might ignore can be vital to what you're trying to talk about, to the information you're trying to communicate. Now, some of you who are sketching may move into watercolor or water-based paint. And so I included some washy stuff here so that you would look at watercolors. So let's talk. I'm not going to give you a technical course. David and Henry are going to have that privilege to get you wet in watercolor. On the left, I use my own energy in relation to a subject that's energetic. If I'm drawing a sleeping child, I can still energize my hand. If I'm looking at waves that are in constant movement, I really have an opportunity of catching a second, a moment in my painting. It's not a film, it's not a video. How can I show movement and energy? I do it with my own movement and energy in my hand. I jump around a lot with the brush. And jumping around, you take a deep breath and you just do it. And I often encourage people who do art, sketching, painting, whatever, to do it like a martial artist would do it. When I learned Japanese sword fighting as an adult, I was really bad at it when I started, and I got hit on the head a lot with a bamboo sword. I had protection, but my teeth started to rattle until I got faster And until I woke up, until I realized, whoa, I really have to be awake here and connected. Well, if my subject is moving, I need to move too. My hand needs to move. The tools I'm using need to move. The material has to move. So keep that in mind. If you want to keep the viewer awake, and if you want to feel connected and focused on what you're doing, keep active. You can draw carefully with great finesse, but with urgency at the same time. Your observational skills are telling you information, you're responding, the rhythm, the way you react, it's still up to you. So you can work fast, you can work slow, you can combine slow and fast as needed in the sketch. On the right, I'm introducing a different medium with an old watercolor. So the old watercolor, the information was water and sky. Big deal. It was interesting, but it wasn't really, I don't know, it was boring to me. So we used to have photographs called Polaroids, and they were instant photography. You took your photograph, and about 5 minutes later, this tongue would open on the camera and a photograph would come out. And in those days, the photographic film, or the actual image of what you photographed, was fused onto cardboard. And some artists experimenting, playing in their studios, started to float those photographs in boiling hot water. And what would happen is this film, very thin, very delicate, would separate from the cardboard. So you had this image of what you photographed floating around in hot water. Well, I liked this technique. So I used to take some of my old watercolors that I found boring, and I would quickly immerse them into the water, and the image would fuse onto them. And I'd pull it out. Half the time it didn't look interesting, but sometimes it worked. And here I got the movement of the old watercolor in the back, sky and water. And I got these photographic images of cans of Canada Dry. And these were cans that people throw out of their cars or step on or litter with garbage. And I liked the way that they were crushed up and what was happening to them. I would photograph them and I could reuse them in a different way. So this was my group of paintings called Canada Dry, because I was working on a series of garbage around the world. I did this quite a number of years ago, and this is one of the ones I've kept. But I guess what I'm trying to communicate here is that if you have unsuccessful sketches, don't throw them away. Try and use them in a different way to get what you want to say, to get some information out. And whatever way you can give them a new life, do it. Because there's always something in a sketch or a painting, even if you don't consider it successful, there's going to be something that's good. Every single piece of art has something in it that's worth preserving. So think about that before you rip up your sketches. Save them, you might need them. Now, where are we here? Okay, whoops. Sorry, there we go. All right, we won't be much longer. Are we running out of time, Kristen? I'm not sure here. Okay.
I think if you could wrap up reasonably soon, that would be great.
Okay, so I'll give it about 5 minutes if that's okay.
Perfect, that's perfect.
So these are little travel sketches that are done with dry pencil, water-based watercolor pencils, and then a watercolor brush. You can add the water when you make them, or you add the water later on. These are colored pencils that are soluble when they get wet. So rocks and water is a subject I'm never, ever tired of. and they have led me for a long time into all kinds of paintings of the same subject. If you put me next to a rock near water, I'm happy, and you could probably leave me there. These are small sketches that I did with no purpose. The information is pretty clear. The big world, the element of water, the sky, and this sort of universal ancient structure of rock. And I love doing stuff like this. So I filled sketchbooks with them. And when I get home, I look at them. I don't look at them on the spot. I don't look at them where I'm doing them. I look at them later. I take my time, I put them all together, and I look at them. And out of these sketches comes an idea, a vague notion of an idea for how I can push them further on into a project. So an architect might look at their architectural sketches and eventually move towards designing a building. I moved towards making a painting. And I decided that I wanted to try something else. I wanted to make vertical designs that show underwater, not what's happening on the top with the waves and the reflection from the sky and all that. I wanted to show an imaginary world underwater. So I looked at my sketches for inspiration, and I took some cheap brown paper, and I began to use the information from the sketches at the top. And then with my imagination, I began to evolve down to the bottom. So I work bigger. If I work small, I can be close to my sketchbook. If I work bigger, I have to back up. Now my arms aren't long enough, so I extend my tools. I use old pieces of wood or whatever that allow me to work from further away. You must adapt when the size of your stuff changes. So these are called underpaintings, and that means they are sketched with dry material, a bit like pencils or chalk. And then the underpainting, I add a little bit of color, I add to them. It's not watercolor. Watercolor is very expensive, so I don't use it in big scale, but it's washed down water-based paint. And this is the beginning. These are paintings that will evolve. Now, I can't remember if I have one last slide. I might not of them. No, I guess not. Whoops, what have I done here? In any event, this is where I am now. Now I still refer to my little sketches on the wall, but I am beginning to develop out of these little sketches the idea of these paintings. We'll see how they evolve. I don't know, I can't seem to get there now, but in any event, that's where I am right now. And I guess that's it. That's enough talking for me. What should I do now? What about my co-pilots? You tell me?
Hi, Joanna. Thank you so much for that.
Okay.
And I'd like to suggest maybe we take a few minutes break, and then Henry will be the next to present today.
Okay. Good idea. Well, thank you, those of you who were patient. I really enjoyed. I hope I conveyed something to you of value, and we will meet in the future. So if you have questions, think about them, and I'll be happy to answer them.
And we will also have a question session at the end of today as well. So if people want to ask questions today, that's also possible. And I thought it was great, Joanna. I know I learned a lot, particularly about your process and about how and what information to include. I thought was really very useful. So thank you.
Good. I'm glad. I lost my notes in the virtual world here, so I had to ad lib the last part. but I hope I've given enough in relation to the topics to be useful. Good. And Henry, you'll have to tell me what to do. What do I get rid of as we continue here? Is there anything I should get off my screen?
If you could stop sharing.
Okay.
Go back to the same button on the bottom at the center. You should be able to stop share.
Well, I'm doing it at the top. Is it the green button on the menu?
On the bottom, yeah.
Oh, on the bottom. Okay, mine seems to be on the top. Hold on. No, there's just your beautiful faces are at the bottom.
I think I can also take over.
Oh, that would be good. I seem to have a new share, but we want to stop the share.
So, Kristen, can you tell me if I'm sharing my screen now?
No, we're still seeing Joanna's screen.
Oh no. Okay.
But I think I can switch it over to you, Henry. So now it should be your screen that's sharing. And yes, now we're seeing your presentation.
Okay.
Oh,
and now it's back to Joanna's.
Uh-oh.
I was just going to ask, David, did you want to present? If you have, you can present first.
Oh, there's Henry. Okay, I can see you, Henry.
Okay, so I just stopped participant sharing. So now, Henry, you can share your screen.
Go ahead, Henry. I have to leave at 1, so I'll pick it up next week.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Kristen, what do you think? Should I go ahead?
Yeah, I think since it's already 9:45 our time, so 10:45 in, so maybe we people had a chance to stretch while we changed over the screen. So maybe we go ahead and start.
Okay, well, sounds good. Okay, well, welcome everyone again to this third workshop of the Towards a Cross-Cultural Sketching School series. My name is Hentry Tsang, and I'm an assistant professor at Athabasca University and also a practicing architect based in Calgary, but also based in Japan. So currently I'm in Tokyo, and I decided to take this opportunity during this sketching school to really explore my community in Japan, in the area of Eastern Japan called Kiba and Toyocho. And this is where all of my sketches are based. And I thought this would be a very interesting exercise to do at the same time as the students, that every week when we have our collaborators, that I learn a little bit more of how other artists and architects sketch and how they approach subject and different themes, that I also kind of start to unlearn and learn the way I see the world and capture it in my own sketching. So actually, it's quite interesting because Joanna was my teacher about 20 years ago, and of course David was also my teacher. So I think a lot of what I do, of course, has its roots back at McGill's architecture school, but at the same time, I've taken, of course, a different approach, and I think Joanna talked about this as well. A personalization of sketching and really making it work for myself, because I think sketching, as throughout all of these workshops, we talk about this as an exercise to help us understand the world around us, understand spaces, especially for architects. It's really to understand how people interact with spaces. So today's workshop is about subject versus object and detail versus information. And I think Joanna already gave us a very thorough and comprehensive description and presentation about these topics. So I think my presentation will follow up very nicely with the same kind of ideas, but also taking it in my personal approach. So this slide I've been showing every week is to talk about why architects sketch. And I've been updating this slide with the sketches I've been doing throughout the sketching school these last few weeks. And you can see how some of this has evolved into incorporate different ways of sketching and ways of seeing things, especially when we talked about sketching the unseen last week, into starting to try to capture more than what you see, but also things that you don't see, such as ideas of sound, of spirituality, of the weather, or you know, and here you also see the same approach that Joanna had, was this way of looking at your subject and filtering the information that is important in your sketch. So why do architects sketch? It's really about, since it's Valentine's Day, and I just wanted to wish everyone a happy Valentine's Day, I want to talk about connections, and it's really about making that connection with the place. And that single moment that you're in that space and connecting and creating this relationship with the architecture, with the elements, with the weather, with the people there, I think it's really about capturing that that relationship that you bond, that bond that you create when you're on location. So this week I decided to take everyone to this location. This is where I did my sketches this week, is at the Museum of Contemporary Art of Tokyo. I wouldn't be an architect if I didn't talk a little bit about architecture. So one thing that I thought was very important to do during the sketching school was also to introduce to you the community I'm sketching. And one part of the process that my sketch experience is about is really to understand the places that I'm sketching, but and able to tell that story about the place. So for this week, I chose this piece of architecture that I wanted to capture in my drawings. And this is probably about 10 minutes from where I am right now. And to also introduce to you a little bit about the architecture of Tokyo. So this is the Museum of Contemporary Art in Tokyo, designed by a local architect by the name of Yanagisawa Takahiko. He's not a very well-known architect outside of Japan, but very well-known locally, especially for his this very modern style of architecture that that is characteristic of his work. This building in particular was completed in 1995. And just to show you a sketch that he did, not of this particular building, I was not able to find a sketch of this, the Museum of Contemporary Art, but I was able to find a different sketch that he did for a different museum. Just to show you how architects use sketch as part of their design process. And I think this also gives you a good idea of his exploration of form, exploration of light, and also architectural detail. So first of all, as I do every week now, is I show you my walk around the building, around the places that I draw, just to give you a sense of the place, because I think that an image of a photograph only one.
I'm finished, but I'm listening to Henry.
only gives you one image of the building, but by doing these time-lapse videos, I think it gives you a better sense of the whole, the size of the building, the experience, the way that the architect designed, the experience of being at this place. So this was my first sketch that I did when I was there. This is a 3-minute sketch I did in my sketchbook. And this is something I learned from Joanna, actually. She, as you saw in her presentation, she does a lot of these drawings on brown paper. So I have this sketchbook that is all toned paper. And this is one technique or one style of drawing that I highly recommend those of you who are interested in sketching in buildings in particular, because if you use a toned paper, like a gray paper or a brown paper, you can work with a black Conte crayon and a white Conte crayon to kind of capture these contrasts of light and shade. And it's relatively simple, and it's very clean. You don't carry, a bottle of water and watercolors that tend to be a little bit more clumsy. So I do like this style of sketching when you're on the run, and it's very portable and lightweight. So this sketch, for example, I did in about 3 minutes, and Joanna talked about this as well. Is how do you simplify the details and patterns and textures when you don't have a lot of time? And as you can see here, there's not a lot of lines in this sketch, but I tried to really capture that the texture of those, the metal panels where you see the perforated steel panels. And you also see the texture of the stone on the stone walls, and also the paving, and capturing a little bit of the connection with the landscape, the tree there. So a quick sketch just to kind of capture those key elements of this building. And again, museums are very interesting subjects to sketch, because people are very used to people sketching in museums. So it's actually a very good place to take your sketchbook. And this week I wanted to show you a little bit of a sketch of an interior space. So first of all, I show you this video of me walking through the main hall, just to give you a sense of what I'm actually feeling. And it's not just a photograph or an image, but there's the sound, the excitement of the people coming into that hall. You can hear the echoing of people talking, and people who are coming into the space to in anticipation of the event. So I'm just gonna play this short video to show you this procession towards the main through the main lobby. So once you get a sense of the space, right? So this is why it's important that you don't sketch with just a photo, because it just tells a very small part of the story, that you get a sense of the space, that mood, that rhythm of the light, the rhythm of the structure. All of that becomes part of the experience of being within a space. So what I do is as I showed you in my previous workshops, is I start with this this quick thumbnail on the corner, and then I go on and sketch the lines of the same lines that I have in my thumbnail into a bigger format, just to kind of capture the main perspective lines and the borders of what I'm trying to capture, and then also focusing on what I really want to show in this, which is this beam of light that comes through and casts this really strong shadow onto these people that are sitting on that little seating thing. So this is pretty much the sketch that I did in about 10, 15 minutes, really just trying to capture the people sitting here at the corner on the bottom left, and how that light shines through and casting this strong shadow, but also capturing that rhythm of the of these zigzagging sculptural elements. So this is the final sketch that I did, including some more hints of what the people are doing. And again, I think this also connects to what Joanna was talking about, is that my subject is really about those people that are close to the window, but then there's also this context of these people that are lining up to buy tickets. There's the people that are selling tickets, and also the context of this structural element that kind of hovers around all these people in this space. So I talk about subject, and this is really what I consider my subject, is really that shadow and casting around those three people sitting on the bench. And then detail versus information is I chose to detail some architectural elements that I thought would be important for me to record. For example, the two spaces that I highlighted in red is what I decided to detail more, or put more effort in detailing, trying to capture the right size, the right angles, the right lines of those details. But everything that's around it is really just a suggestion that they keep on going all the way till the end of that of this perspective. As you can see, the same treatment of my people and the treatment of my of the architecture is really the same. I don't really go into very much detail where it's not necessary. But at the same time, what I find very interesting when using this medium is that the gray is the color of the paper. So all you really need to do is capture the light and shade, and it's a constant kind of search for finding where is the light and where is the shade being cast. This is also a lesson that I learned from Joanna years ago, is the understanding perspective and foreshortening. When you have things that are moving backwards, things that are close to you are much larger. So anything that is moving backwards becomes smaller and smaller, but also things like columns, or in this case, these V-shaped structural elements also become closer and closer as they kind of recede backwards. So just be sure that you have that in mind when you're kind of planning this kind of drawing. So I wanted to show you this drawing in particular because I felt like, you know, in architecture, and interior space is quite important, and we do try to capture that that play of light and the people and within those spaces. Okay, so as I do every week now, after every session, I go out and do sketches. I try to come up with a couple of cross-cultural sketching best practices to end my presentation, just so that we add to the list of things that we need to be aware of when we're out and about doing our sketching. And this week, I wanted to focus on, museums in particular, because I think that museums are one of the best places to sketch. So first of all, in museums, be respectful to the artwork and work with clean mediums, such as a pen and a pencil. So I suggest don't bring liquids to a museum. So this medium that I introduced to you today, which is the Conte crayons, the black and the white on tone paper, I think is a very appropriate one to bring to a museum. Avoid photography when it's not permitted. Flash is usually not allowed, as the light of the flash may cause damage to some of the lights of the artwork that is a little bit more light sensitive. Some places may have bans on sketching, so make sure that you check that. And don't disturb others enjoying the exhibit by keeping yourself out of the path of circulation. I think that's also very important in any situation, but I think within a museum, you have people walking, so you want to make sure that you don't disturb other people when you're doing your sketching. Again, this is me on the side of a road trying to do a sketch. So what I suggest is do go check out museums and sketch at museums. Museums are one of the best places to sketch, and as most people there are used to drawing or being drawn. Sketch to museum. Museums are culturally and architecturally interesting, so they are great for studying unique designs and spatial quality. And sketch to art. Art pieces can also be very interesting subjects, such as sculptures and installations. So I do recommend that as a good subject if you're out of ideas. Otherwise, I also like to show my 1-year-old who's kind of tagging on along the sketching school program, and he's actually being more productive than I am. He did these 4 watercolors in a matter of maybe 20 minutes. So again, I show you this quote by Pablo Picasso. It took me 4 years to paint like Raphael, but a lifetime to paint like a child. Just to remind everyone that, it doesn't matter how many years that you've painted. It's not the experience that counts. It's about doing it. And my son Issei constantly reminds me how by his fearless strokes onto the page that maybe not overthinking it is probably the best way to get a drawing done. So again, if my 1-year-old son can do it, you can too. So with this, I'm just going to end my presentation, and I would suggest everyone to post your drawings onto the Miro board, as I'm posting mine there as well as my son's. And I hope to see you all on Friday so that we can engage in a more deeper conversation about different approaches to sketching and discussing about different ways to capture the truth that surrounds you. I would love to see what everyone's up to. So thank you very much. And with that, I would like to open up the floor for questions or for discussion.
Thanks so much, Henry. We were talking a bit in the feedback session on Friday about fearlessness and courage in drawing. And I was saying also that in photographing my drawings for this sketching school, because I'm posting them on the Miro board, I find it also is a way of giving myself like the courage to try some of these new techniques, because I know I already have it captured. So it sort of allows me to be more courageous in what I try on the drawing next. So that's been kind of a fun realization. We have a question for Joanna in the chat. It says, "Hi, Joanna. As a person new to sketching, I find a tendency to want to just make it good, quote unquote. I'm really grateful for how you have broken down the elements of a sketch and your process. I feel less intimidated to sit down this week and work on different sketches and see what they progress towards. Thank you. I don't know if you want to say anything more about that, Joanna.
I think Joanna's on mute, so
yeah.
That's why we unmute her.
Okay, I'm unmuted and I will be brief. I'm sorry, I think I went way longer than I was supposed to. Is it Jenna who asked that question? Yes.
Yes.
Good or bad inhibits us. Don't go sketching with your Aunt Martha looking over your shoulder, okay? You do the sketch, it's your moment, you are responsible for it, but don't judge it. Judge it later if you have to. When you sketch, be the martial artist. You're alone, you find what you want to do, you do the urgency, be in the moment, then stop. And if you have other thoughts roaming around your brain, is it good or bad? Don't think about that. Just push them aside and you'll be fine. But the judgment part, we all have some of that where you can't bring it with you sketching. It's not part of your materials. Leave it at home.
Thank you so much, Joanna. I think that's such an important message.
And one final thing, bluff. It's gotten me through life. If you don't know how to do it, just do it and don't worry about it. Okay.
Thank you for that. Does anyone else, if anyone else has a question, they can go ahead and unmute and ask their question, or again, throw something in the chat.
One thing I wanted to mention is that I think sketching is not about capturing that postcard perfect image. Don't think about every sketch having to be, a postcard perfect image that you're going to send to your parents. I think that's what Joanna is saying as well, is that it's really about exploration. Think about it more like you're writing a diary and it's a very personal moment. I think it's more about being true to that moment and that relationship that I talked about, trying to capture something about it. It's probably people having a conversation in a cafe, or maybe it's the light beaming through into a building. There must be something that attracted you to try to capture it. It might not be the best sketch that you want to put on the wall, but it's going to be recording something about your interaction with that space. I think that's more important, that you recognize that and not try to make that, postcard image.
I also find when I'm sketching, there are times when, as you say, Henry, not concentrating too much on is the whole drawing a good drawing, because often I'm not happy with a lot of it, but there's one element of it that I've really captured what I wanted to capture. And so both learn from that and kind of, celebrate and enjoy that. And I think that's really important. Yeah. Okay, if we don't have any further questions, or if Joanna, if you or Henry have any last thoughts, we'll go ahead and wrap up the session.
I was hoping to speak to South Africa, but they don't have any questions. So maybe on Friday.
You can probably speak to them on Friday.
Yeah.
Again, I just wanted to remind everyone that Joanna has generously agreed to be in both the morning and the evening sessions. And then there'll be probably a combination of Henry and David and myself. And I think Douglas said he might be drop in for those. So we really hope that people will come to the sessions. We had 2 really good sessions last week. And again, we just wanted to remind you that, you know, if you don't feel comfortable putting your name on your drawings on the mural board, that's totally fine. And, you know, you can come to the session. You don't necessarily have to talk. Other people often have similar questions to what you do. Or what we did last week was we just went through drawings without actually people having to say, that's my drawing. Chris just chose drawings and talked about them. So, so if you're feeling intimidated about that, about coming to the session, hopefully you can try to get yourself to come and not feel like you'll be put on the spot, because definitely we will not put you on the spot in those sessions. And we've just had really great conversations. So so I encourage everybody to come, and so hopefully we'll see you then. And thank you again so much, Henry and Joanna, for your presentations. I look forward to the sessions on Friday, Joanna, because I already learned a lot today. So I look forward to learning even more on Friday.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. And I'll see you Friday.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Joanna.
Bye.